Governor Florio, Professor Kennan, other distinguished guests, members of the Princeton University community. I am extremely pleased to welcome back to Princeton a distinguished statesman, the Honorable James A. Baker III, class of 1952, and currently U.S. Secretary of State. It is my honor to introduce him to you on behalf of the Woodrow Wilson School and the class of '93, co-sponsors of this event. Dean Donald Stokes of the Woodrow Wilson School and Michael Coton of the class of '93 are here with me on the stage. It was only 6 months ago that Jim Baker and I shared another platform together. At that time, we were in front of Nassau Hall at commencement, where he was awarded an honorary degree. The citation that was read included the words, and I quote, "His tenure in public office has been marked by boundless energy, a deserved reputation for competent and unflappable determination, and an ability to build consensus behind important national goals." End of quote. We clearly have seen more of these qualities since that time. In the few ensuing months, Jim Baker has continued his tireless pace. He skillfully guided U.S. relations with the Soviet Union during the days of August, those very memorable days of August of this last year, brought new hope for peace in the Middle East, and supported President Bush in an unprecedented and critical decision to withdraw nuclear weapons from Europe. One of the many recent newspaper stories about Jim Baker's diplomatic mission starts out, and I quote once again, "Tigers are not known to roam in the Middle East," close quote. The journalist was referring, of course, to Jim's 6th trip to that region, which resulted in an agreement for peace talks. This particular tiger has roamed not only the Middle East, but all parts of the world, producing a remarkable record as a statesman in an era of change and transition. We at Princeton, therefore, are very pleased and honored to have him here today to talk about America and the post-coup Soviet Union. It is my pleasure to introduce to you the Honorable James A. Baker III, Secretary of State of the United States. Jim?
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you, President Shapiro, for that very, very generous introduction. Governor Florio, Representative Dwyer, Representative Rukema, Dean Stokes, President of the class of '93, Mike Coton, my fellow Princetonians, including Professor George Kennan, ladies and gentlemen. 41 years ago this week, while I was in my junior year here at Princeton and reading the great authors, William Faulkner was already accepting the Nobel Prize for Literature. In his acceptance speech, he said, "The tragedy of the day, indeed one might say the challenge of the generation, was a general and universal physical fear, and that this fear was so great as to extinguish problems of the spirit. As he put it, there is only one question, and that is, when will I be blown up?" For my generation, Faulkner surely posed the right question. After 1945, one strategic, political, and moral imperative dominated American policy. That was to prevent war with the Soviet Union while upholding Western values and interests. Better dead than red, the saying went. But in fact, there was no choice at all. While nuclear war would have destroyed us physically, Stalinism would have destroyed us spiritually. Everything else, unfortunately, had to be secondary. To cope with this imperative, George Kennan articulated the logic and concept of containment. Soviet power, to George Kennan, was a fluid stream, one which moved unwaveringly toward the goal of filling every nook and cranny available to it in the basin of world power. Inherently antagonistic to what the West stood for, Stalinism had to be stopped. And the way to do this was through patient but firm and vigilant containment. Containment and a Cold War, rather than rollback and a hot war, might work, Professor Kennan argued, because the Soviet system was profoundly at variance with human nature and therefore, in the long run, was illegitimate. The aim, or more realistically, the hope, was that containment would turn Soviet power on itself and would hasten its decay. Eventually, the Stalinist threat would collapse of its own inner contradictions. 4 decades later, the simple fact of the matter is, containment worked. The state that Lenin founded and Stalin built held within itself the seeds of its demise. And when pressure from the outside was maintained and windows to the West were created, the Soviet state broke up from the inside out. History has now answered Faulkner's question. We will not be blown up in a war with the Soviet Union. But that is not the end of the story. Our policy was never solely about preventing a hot war or defeating Stalinism in a Cold War. What every president and every Congress have sought is a different world, free from the shadows of war, of political tyranny, of economic distress. These were, and they are, our ideals. And these ideals, seasoned by a healthy sense of realism, must continue to drive our policy toward the peoples who were our Cold War enemies, but who now seek our friendship and our support. As a consequence of the Soviet collapse, we live in a new world. We must take advantage of this new Russian revolution, set in motion with the defeat of the August coup, to cultivate relationships that can benefit not only America, but the entire world. For unlike the Bolshevik Revolution, this revolution of 1991 contains the seeds of a brighter future and enduring peace. It may even contain the potential for a flowering of democracy in places so long inhospitable to it. No one, not even those making this revolution, can know the final outcome or structure or common entities to be defined by these momentous events. These are in fact being defined by the participants even as I speak here this afternoon. They, and not we or any other outsider, will determine the outcome. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm very conscious of the fact that events are moving quickly and they are altering history's course minute by minute, because this is, after all, a revolution that we're talking about. By its very nature, it will move into unforeseen territory. Undoubtedly, questions and problems will arise that no one can foresee today. So what I present to you today is not a fixed blueprint. Rather, it is the principles and agenda and approach which together define an agenda for action in a revolutionary and unpredictable situation, a situation in which the West can play an important supporting role. We are not the leaders of this revolution, but neither are we mere bystanders. We are models for its leaders. We are partners in progress, and we can be beneficiaries of its success for decades to come. But the time for action is short. Much as we will benefit if this revolution succeeds, we will pay if it fails, just as we paid with the collapse of the promising democratic revolution in Petrograd in February of 1917. The pace of change is unrelenting, the transformation radical. History is giving no one a breathing space. So today I would like to tell you what, in our view, is at stake, what is at stake for my generation and for future generations in the collapse of the Soviet Empire. And then I would like to suggest to you what needs to be done. What needs to be done so that the weapons of the Cold War do not become instruments of unintended and incalculable violence. What needs to be done to cultivate democratic values and tolerance in a region that is undergoing its own enlightenment. And what needs to be done to promote an economy where individual initiative creates its own reward and hope for a better future across the former Soviet Union. Let me begin with a brief review of where we have been and where we now stand. Almost 3 years ago, President Bush foresaw the new opportunities in United States-Soviet relations when he said it was time to move beyond containment. His charge to me was very clear. Engage with the Soviets, explore whether the promise of perestroika and new thinking could create a new reality for sustained United States-Soviet cooperation and the basis for a new era internationally. In the fall of 1989, I referred to this process as the search for points of mutual advantage. Looking back, I think it's fair to say that this search proved successful beyond anyone's expectations. Indeed, so successful that just a year later, in October 1990, I was able to say that the points of mutual advantage had become pathways of cooperation. In a very real sense, we and the Soviets had become partners, no longer competitors across the globe. Partners in facilitating the unification of Germany in peace and freedom. Partners in seeing Central and Eastern Europe peacefully liberated from communism's stranglehold. Partners in negotiating radical reductions in conventional and nuclear weapons. Partners in ending regional conflicts from Central America to Southern Africa to Cambodia. Partners in reversing Iraqi aggression and subsequently in promoting Arab-Israeli peace. Partners, in short, in ending the Cold War, the dangerous but ultimately necessary confrontation that defined and so badly distorted international life for my generation. These achievements were possible primarily because of one man, Mikhail Gorbachev. The transformations we are dealing with now would not have begun were it not for him. His place in history is secure, for he helped end the Cold War peacefully, and for that the world is grateful and respectful. The same is true of his partner, Eduard Shevardnadze. Together, new realities have been created by the new thinking in Soviet foreign and defense policy. But these policies were themselves the product of a parallel but potentially far more important change. The reforms they and other reformers began that transformed the Soviet Union itself. Whatever the original intentions of perestroika and glasnost, by early August of this year, the all-powerful Stalinist state was well on its way to dissolution. A new civil society was breaking out across the Soviet Union. Democracy was replacing communism. Power was moving from the center to the republics, and the old centrally planned economy was in the throes of collapse. Then a small group of willful men, the embodiment of the Stalinist past and its institutions, sought to reverse this revolution by arresting President Gorbachev and summoning the tanks. But the Russian people and their courageous leader, Boris Yeltsin, surmounted those tanks with the will of the people. By their heroic triumph, the Soviet internal revolution, in the space of just 3 days, telescoped history years forward. As Alexander Yakovlev said to me on the very day that the coup failed, the coup plotters sought to kill the revolution, but they succeeded only in accelerating it. Perestroika, originally initiated for the purpose of humanizing and revitalizing Marxism-Leninism, ironically ended up producing its resounding defeat instead. For the failed coup not only sounded the death knell of the Communist Party, those 3 days shook the Soviet world to its foundations. And in the 3 months that followed, the foundation itself has been uprooted. In its wake, the map and politics of Eurasia are being changed beyond recognition, and with them, the assumptions that have guided American policy since World War II. The dramatic collapse of communism in Moscow and the unraveling of the centralized Soviet state confront the West with great opportunities, yes, but also with ominous dangers. Popularly elected leaders now run large and strategically important republics, including Russia, Ukraine, Kazakhstan. They look to America and the West for guidance and help in launching genuine, far-reaching political and economic reform. If they can succeed, the centuries-old menace posed to the West first by czarist autocracy and then by Soviet totalitarianism will have been permanently altered. The opportunities are historic. We have the chance to anchor Russia, Ukraine, and other republics firmly in the Euro-Atlantic community and the democratic commonwealth of nations. We have the chance to bring democracy to lands that have little knowledge of it, an achievement that can transcend centuries of history. We have the chance, indeed, to help harness the rich human and material resources of those vast lands to the cause of freedom instead of totalitarianism, thereby immeasurably enhancing the security, the prosperity, and freedom of America and the world. Yet the dangers are equal in scale to the opportunities. Economically, the old Soviet system has collapsed, multiplying every day the threats these reformers face, from social dislocation to political fragmentation to ethnic violence. Reconstructing economies that have been devastated by central planning is even more difficult than reconstruction from the devastation of war. Politically, the dangers of protracted anarchy and chaos are obvious. Great empires rarely go quietly into extinction. No one can dismiss the possibility that darker political forces lurk in the wings, representing the remnants of Stalinism or the birth of nationalist extremism or even fascism, ready to exploit the frustrations of a proud but exhausted people in their hour of despair. Strategically, both of these alternatives, anarchy or reaction, could become threats to the West's vital interests when they shake a land that is still home to nearly 30,000 nuclear weapons and the most powerful arsenal of conventional weaponry ever amassed in Europe. Taken together, these dangers serve, I think, as a call to action for America and the West. This historic watershed, the collapse of communist power in Bolshevism's birthplace, marks the challenge that history has dealt us: to see the end of the Soviet Empire turned into a beginning for democracy and economic freedom in Russia and Ukraine, in Kazakhstan and Belarus, in Armenia, Kyrgyzstan, and elsewhere across the former Soviet Empire. Here is what we think the West must do. As we organized an alliance against Stalinism during the Cold War, today America can mobilize a coalition in support of freedom. Together with our NATO allies, Japan, South Korea, the other OECD states, our Gulf Coalition partners, and international institutions, we must pursue a diplomacy of collective engagement. Together with the New Democrats in the former Soviet Union, we can help create pathways of hope so that the new Russian Revolution can fulfill the promise of the next generation. We alone cannot determine whether these New Democrats will succeed. Their success, of course, lies in their hands and in the hard choices that they make. But history will count our efforts as success if we help the Democrats hold open opportunities to develop a better future. This should be a major goal of the West, to help create a climate in which progress is possible. Indeed, to help promote a process where even limited successes build hope and the authority of democrats over time. To multiply the value of our efforts, the international coalition must divide its labors. The wreckage of communism is too large for any one nation to go it alone or to try and do everything. Working in concert, we must make use of the comparative advantages that each of us holds. For example, the United States could put to work the scientists at Los Alamos and Livermore who designed the weapons of the Cold War to help the Soviets destroy their weapons of mass destruction now. America, including state governments and private businesses in Alaska, Washington, Oregon, and California, along with Japan and South Korea, could help develop the resource-rich Soviet Far East. The Nordic countries could focus on the Baltics as well as St. Petersburg. And the IMF and World Bank could expand dramatically their engagement with reform-minded republics and any common entity to support comprehensive economic reform. To crystallize this coalition, the President proposes that we begin by holding a coordinating conference to better divide our labor and responsibilities to help meet immediate and drastically increasing Soviet humanitarian needs. The United States will invite the advanced industrial democracies, the Central and Eastern European states, the members of the Gulf War Coalition, and the international financial institutions to join us in Washington in early January to discuss how best to meet ongoing humanitarian needs over the course of the next year. This conference should work toward helping the Soviet peoples help themselves to get through the winter and to ensure that together we take the right steps this winter, spring, and summer to ensure a better situation next winter. Our work should focus on critical short-term needs: food, medicine, fuel, shelter. In the meantime, the United States will continue its ambitious food and medical assistance program that the President announced a year ago today. But our collective engagement must extend beyond immediate humanitarian needs, and it should be organized around three tasks. First and foremost, we must help the Soviets destroy and control the military remnants of the Cold War. Second, we must help our former adversaries understand the ways of democracy to build political legitimacy out of the wreckage of totalitarianism. And third, we must help free market forces stimulate economic stabilization and recovery in the lands of the former Soviet Union. Obviously, one of the most vexing questions we face is who is the authority or authorities with whom we can deal. In a revolution where political authority has diffused and fractured, the possible interlocutors seem almost endless. In the face of such uncertainty, the West, we think, should stick to fundamentals and support those who put into practice, those wherever they may be found, who put into practice our principles and values. This means that we will work with those republics and with any common entity which commit to responsible security policies, democratic political practices, and free market economics. Fortunately, new leaders are emerging who are committed to these principles. The three tasks I have outlined represent those areas where our principles matter the most. They also represent the responsibilities that members of the Euro-Atlantic community have all already assumed. By accepting these responsibilities, new political entities in the former Soviet Union can join in the democratic Commonwealth of Nations, can gain political acceptance, and can justify our economic support. Clearly, some, Russia, Ukraine, Kazakhstan, Armenia, Kyrgyzstan, already are showing their intention to accept the responsibilities of the democratic community of nations. They understand that their success depends above all on their commitment to democracy and economic liberty. Clearly, other governments, for example, Georgia, are showing already that communism can be replaced by governments that are authoritarian and those are equally undeserving of our acceptance and support. Let me turn now to discuss how these three tasks can serve as an agenda for action. The Cold War left tens of thousands of weapons littering the Soviet Union. It created a massive military-industrial complex. We must work with Russia, Ukraine, Kazakhstan, Belarus, the other republics, and any common entity to help them pursue responsible security policies. And that means, first and foremost, destroying and controlling the most dangerous vestiges of the Cold War, weapons of mass destruction. First, we do not want to see new nuclear weapon states emerge as a result of the transformation of the Soviet Union. Of course, we want to see the START Treaty ratified and implemented. But we also want to see Soviet nuclear weapons remain under safe, responsible, and reliable control with a single unified authority. The precise nature of that authority is for Russia, Ukraine, Kazakhstan, Belarus, and again, any common entity to determine. A single authority could, of course, be based on collective decision-making on the use of nuclear weapons. We are, however, opposed to the proliferation of any additional independent command authority or control over nuclear weapons. For those republics who seek complete independence, we expect them to adhere to the Non-Proliferation Treaty as non-nuclear weapon states. We expect them to agree to full-scope IAEA safeguards, and we expect them to implement effective export controls on nuclear materials and related technology. As long as any such independent states retain nuclear weapons on their territory, those states should take part in unified command arrangements that exclude the possibility of independent control. In this connection, we strongly welcome Ukraine's determination to become nuclear-free by eliminating all nuclear weapons from its soil, and its commitment, pending that elimination, to remain part of a single, unified command authority. At the direction of President Bush, we have begun exchanges between our experts on nuclear weapons safety, security, and dismantlement, and their Soviet counterparts. This process has begun, and we will accelerate it during the course of the coming weeks. This is just one element of a larger effort to help enhance the safety and security of Soviet nuclear weapons and rapidly eliminate large numbers of them in a safe and environmentally sound manner. I am pleased to announce that the administration is prepared to draw upon the $400 million appropriated by Congress to assist in the destruction of Soviet weapons of mass destruction. If during the Cold War we spent trillions of dollars on missiles and bombers to destroy Soviet nuclear weapons in time of war, surely now we can spend just millions of dollars to actually destroy and help control those same nuclear weapons in time of peace. Nothing could be more in the national security interests of the United States. Ladies and gentlemen, that's neither charity nor aid. That's an investment in a secure future for every American. Surely, the American people will be willing to spend some of our defense budget at a cost of less than $2 per person in order to begin destroying nuclear weapons that continue to be aimed at us. Second, we want to see that proliferation of weapons of mass destruction and destabilizing conventional weaponry does not spread beyond the borders of the former Soviet Union. While the nightmare of Orwell's 1984 is past, the terror of 1994 is that a Saddam Hussein or a Muammar Gaddafi will use the black market to buy weapons from rogue military units or to buy blueprints from unemployed engineers. We want to ensure that the creative talents of Soviet scientists and engineers are not diverted to dangerous military programs elsewhere in the world. And we expect republics and any common entity to establish strict export control policies and to put in place strict internal mechanisms capable of implementing those policies effectively. The administration will send a team of experts to brief Republic leaders on what the international community expects in this area. We will work with the other members of the Nuclear Suppliers Group, the Australia Group, the Missile Technology Control Regime, to organize seminars and to provide technical expertise to the republics and any common entity. We should promote programs in which Soviet scientists and engineers, possibly working with Western counterparts, can turn their talents to pressing global problems rather than the creation of new threats. Third, internal arms races between former Soviet republics represent a potentially grave danger to European security. Already we are seeing signs that some Republican governments, notably Azerbaijan, are arming themselves for war against other republics. Those who pursue these misguided and anachronistic policies should know that they will receive neither acceptance nor support from the West. In this regard, we are encouraged by efforts of Ukraine and Russia to establish a productive and non-threatening relationship. We expect to see the CFE treaty implemented by relevant authorities, and we will propose to broaden the CFE 1A negotiations so that relevant republics will fall under the manpower provisions. Next week in Brussels, I will be discussing with our NATO allies how we might reach out to those republics and any common entity which pursue responsible security policies, democratic political practices, and free market economics. By reaching out through NATO, we can reassure republics politically and dampen their desires to engage in destabilizing arms competitions with one another. Fourth, we want to see the demilitarization of the Soviet economy and the transition to democratic civil-military relations, free markets, and a balance between social needs and reasonable and responsible security. Obviously, no one expects total disarmament, but the fact is that the Stalinist state was a military-industrial complex which robbed the people to benefit itself. That complex will continue to strangle democracy and any hope for economic recovery for as long as it commands the bulk of Soviet resources. Next Thursday, in meetings with NATO foreign ministers, we will talk about and will meet the following day with our Eastern counterparts, the foreign ministers of Central and Eastern Europe, in the first North Atlantic Cooperation Council meeting. We have proposed that NATO create a defense conversion working group to facilitate the full range of political, economic, and social challenges that are associated with this undertaking. This, of course, will require that we draw upon all the resources at our disposal, including the participation of multilateral organizations. I think that the most striking characteristic of the post-coup environment has been the dramatic shift of power from the center to the republics. This crisis of legitimacy of the Soviet Empire has taken the form of an anti-communist revolution, but it is being driven by a parallel revolution of at least equal strength. That is, an anti-imperialist revolution. Together, the crisis of political legitimacy, the rebirth of nationalism, and economic collapse are driving Soviet dissolution. The result has been the severe undermining of central authority and the devolution of power to the republics, most of which have declared independence and created new authorities with new legitimacy. Now they have to determine what that independence means in practice, both for their own peoples as well as for future inter-republic relations. In the process, newly independent republics will find that they too cannot escape the problems of legitimacy and nationalism. We are reasonably hopeful that the republics will follow the democratic path and formulate a new legitimacy from the ground up. But while they may be better equipped to deal with these issues than is a weakened center, the republics are clearly not immune to the forces of fragmentation. Even at the republic level, political authority divorced from the consent of the governed is being challenged. Likewise, ethnic minorities inside republics are demanding their rights be accommodated. Unless republic governments respond by complementing their independence with democracy and the equal treatment of persons belonging to minorities, they will soon find themselves suffering the very same crises of legitimacy, cohesion, and effectiveness that has caused the centrifugal devolution of power in the Soviet Union itself. Without legitimacy, there will never be stability. And without stability, Western security will never be assured. As I noted when I laid out our 5 principles in the aftermath of the coup attempt on September the 4th, the United States will welcome into the community of democratic nations those new political entities who believe in democratic values and follow democratic practices, who safeguard human rights, including equal treatment of minorities, who respect borders and commit to changes only through peaceful and consensual means, and who will adhere to the international obligations and the norms and practices of the Helsinki Final Act and the Charter of Paris. But we will isolate those who cloak Stalinism or fascism in a facade of nationalist or liberal or democratic rhetoric. Over a year ago, I called for a broad-based democratic dialogue with all levels of Soviet society, and to that end, we have expanded our contacts and relations with republics and with local authorities. Many of these new leaders want to follow us to build democracy and free markets. To help them, in addition, we will propose to discuss with our CSCE colleagues possible ways to integrate into CSCE those republics and any common entities which subscribe to and are willing to implement our 5 principles. To send our CSCE ambassador to visit republics to discuss how CSCE norms can be put into practice, and to have the United States Information Agency expand its exchange programs to help states and localities in the United States promote expanded contacts. A large component of this might include a public policy training program for republic and local officials. Now, while we work with Russians, Ukrainians, Kazakhs, and others to destroy weapons and to cultivate democracy, the Russian winter, just as in 1812, 1917, and 1941, may again influence history's course. As the economy collapses with no bottom in sight, the onset of cold weather is exacerbating the situation and is creating acute food, medicine, and energy shortages. To meet these rapidly expanding needs, the United States has already this year shipped 18 million tons of food, the largest by far of any Western country. We have granted $4 billion in CCC food and grain credits this year, 2.3 billion of those just since the August coup. Through the President's Emergency Medical Initiative, we've shipped through Project HOPE close to 20 million in medical supplies, and we plan to double this amount over the next 18 months. These supplies, which are all donated by American firms and average American citizens, have reached the Soviet peoples where they need them most, in the Urals, in the Aral Sea region of Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, and the Chernobyl region of Ukraine, as well as in Armenia, Moscow, and soon in Belarus. Over 8 million of these medical supplies have gone to the Baltic countries, and with their independence, the President has created a new and separate program for them. To facilitate meeting humanitarian needs, we will deliver or expend the $165 million in Department of Agriculture grant funds to meet food shortages this winter, and we will draw upon the $100 million Congress has just authorized to transport humanitarian assistance. We are also acting at this very moment to send food stocks left over from Desert Storm to regions in critical need, Armenia, the industrial cities of the Urals, and Moscow and St. Petersburg. The first shipments of these will be delivered by United States C-5 military aircraft to St. Petersburg and to Moscow next week. Beyond the humanitarian problems, we know that, at least over the near term, democracy and free markets are unlikely to succeed everywhere across the lands of the Soviet Union as we knew it. There are likely to be islands of democracy and free markets that have to stand as bulwarks against other islands of chaos or authoritarianism, perhaps even fascism. In this environment, the Democrats in Russia, Ukraine, Kazakhstan, Armenia, and elsewhere must be able to offer pathways of hope to a better future. We can help them define that path, for they will turn to us, to America, and to Americans as inspirations for the future, as sources of advice, and as partners in their work. And we can engage with our friends and allies by starting with human capital, people. In this connection, the best way the West can help is to place Western experts on the ground and to bring Russians, Ukrainians, Kazakhs, and others here for training. The President has already approved an effort to put Americans on the ground to solve long-term food distribution problems. Several American firms have offered their executives and will cover the costs to assist this effort. While much of this effort will have to be done through the private sector, assisted by organizations like the Citizens Democracy Corps, the administration is proposing several steps to augment our ongoing USIA efforts and to expand the human factor. We will work with the Congress to support an expanded Peace Corps program in at least 4 republics. And I would like to see at least 250 Peace Corps volunteers on the ground by next winter. We will expand Commerce's business training program to accommodate 150 Soviet interns in the coming year. We will work with numerous voluntary organizations to look into ways they might expand their presence. Clearly, of course, the bulk of the responsibility must lie with Republic leaders who have already assumed primary control over economic policy and resources. They must make the hard choices necessary for economic recovery, and the choices they make must include free trade between republics. It would truly be a tragedy if Stalinist autarky that isolated the Soviet economy were replaced by Republican autarky that will isolate and impoverish individual republics. Yet where comprehensive reforms are undertaken, we will work with other Western governments to form public-private partnerships that can help the Democrats create opportunities for a better future. For the administration's part, we intend to be a catalyst for this partnership. We will work with the business community to help bring American business into Russia, Ukraine, Kazakhstan, Armenia, and other reforming republics. As a part of this commitment, we are taking the following immediate steps. The President today is announcing that Deputy Secretary of State Lawrence Eagleburger will be the United States government coordinator for all of these assistance efforts. With the President's full trust and authority, Deputy Secretary Eagleburger will be the champion, in effect, of our assistance efforts. We intend to propose authorizing legislation to the Congress on its return to facilitate our efforts to provide assistance and technical cooperation. A major aim of this legislation will be to promote trade, business, and investment development by American companies in Russia, Ukraine, Kazakhstan, and other republics. In addition, the administration will conduct a thorough review of barriers to American business operating there to make it easier for American businesses to join this effort. We will put together, in consultation with the Congress, a $100 million technical assistance program for the coming calendar year. Again, a major aim of this program will be to use government funds to catalyze private sector involvement. This money will, of course, not come from domestic accounts, but from assistance to other foreign nations. And given the gravity of the situation, there is no other choice. The President will ask the heads of the Trade and Development Program, the Overseas Private Investment Corporation, and the Export-Import Bank to examine the possibility of focusing some of their efforts on facilitating the work of American business in the food distribution, energy, and housing sectors. These sectors are likely to be critical to the success of democracy and free markets And while we help the Soviets, we would be supporting American business too. The President will also ask them to see what they can do to facilitate the involvement of American business in defense conversion efforts. But these bilateral efforts must be complemented by the work of the international community. Through our Group of Seven initiative, we are forging a Group of Seven debt deferral arrangement to permit continued flows of capital. To support the international community's involvement in support of democracy and free markets, we will support accelerated IMF and World Bank engagement to put together credible economic plans for those republics which follow the security and political responsibilities that we have identified. Ladies and gentlemen, let me close by saying this. For the third time in this century, we have ended a war, this time a cold one, between the great powers. After World War I, President Wilson, of course, a president of our university, and the inspiration for its School of International Public Affairs, struggled, but in vain, to call America to its historical mission. His cause was right, his cause was just, and above all, his cause was in the best interests of the United States of America. But he was defeated. Isolationism returned, and we know the story. Fascism and war followed. After World War II, our leaders, the Kennans of that generation, learned from the defeat of Wilson's vision. Surveying the wreckage made possible in part by America's isolationism of the 1920s and 30s, they understood that America had to stay engaged internationally. In a bipartisan way, they committed themselves to turn the war into an enduring peace. And of course, their work is plain to see today, for its legacy is still with us. And that legacy is a democratic Europe and a democratic Japan, both prosperous and peace-loving. Now, their vision has been realized. We have skirted Faulkner's question, and we have avoided nuclear war. And we have seen the demise of Stalinism. But today, after the Cold War, we again stand at history's precipice. If during the Cold War we faced each other as two scorpions in a bottle, now the Western nations and the former Soviet republics stand as awkward climbers on a steep mountain. Held together by a common rope, a fall toward fascism or anarchy in the former Soviet Union will pull the West down too. Yet equally as important, a strong and steady pull by the West now can help them to gain their footing so that they too can climb above to enduring democracy and freedom. Surely, my friends, we must strengthen that rope and not sever it. From Odessa on the Black Sea to Vladivostok on the Pacific, the people are tired and hungry, they are disoriented, and they are confused. These people must be able to see that Democrats and reformers can deliver the goods, that there is some cause for hope, some sign that life will get better. For they are coming to grips with the fact that the ideas that have ruled their lives for 70 years, the ill-conceived ideas of Marx, Lenin, and Stalin, are not ideas at all, but lies. Now these people who have lived under the lie must learn what it is like to live under freedom. This will be hard work. As we have said before, it will be painful. And it may seem easy for them to slip from their commitment to freedom, to turn to the simplistic solutions of a new demagogue or dictator. And if they do, their problems will again manifestly become our concerns, as the turn of peoples toward fascism in the 1930s became a threat to our very existence. Ladies and gentlemen, what this means for America is that we face a simple choice. We can follow our fears and turn inward, ignoring the opportunities presented by the collapse of the Soviet Empire, or we can answer the summons of history, and we can lead toward a better future for all. When Faulkner spoke 41 years ago, he did not succumb to the paralyzing fear raised by the specter of nuclear Armageddon. Instead, he argued that the basest of all things is to be afraid, that we must conquer our fear, that man would not merely endure, but prevail. I believe that. I believe that having prevailed over the twin fears of nuclear war and Stalinism, we can prevail over the tyranny of the spirit that might threaten reform and democracy and that might bring darkness to our lives as well. We can prevail as well over the fearful isolationism that threatens to return us to the failures of the 20s and the 30s. We can prevail over political paralysis to forge a bipartisan consensus about what has to be done, and then, united at home, we can join with our allies to form a new coalition, a coalition for a diplomacy of collective engagement, a coalition to create pathways of hope, a coalition to make of the end of the Cold War a beginning, a new beginning for all the nations of the world. Ladies and gentlemen, history and the American people expect no less of us. Thank you all very, very much. Thank you very much. Thank you all.
Secretary Baker, this is an historic hall, Alexander Hall and Richardson Auditorium. Over the decades, it has borne witness to many exciting events. But your thoughtful, insightful, and inspiring remarks today surely will be one of the most memorable moments in the history of this campus, in the history of this hall itself, and of course of great importance to our country. So thank you very much for coming here to Princeton today. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. Thank you.